Hey, welcome back, everybody. We have missed you. It's been a little while, about 5 or 6 months since our last episode of the Leaders Lab podcast. Honestly, we love doing that show. We had some incredible guests, people like Mike Michaelwitz, who wrote Profit First. We had John Warlow, who wrote Built to Sell. Business influencers like David Meltzer, spiritual leader and friend Tommy Rosen multiple times, my good friend Nick Bradley, who helps companies scale up, and Moira Kusaba, who was at one time the number one Beachbody coach in the world and is just a heck of a businesswoman in general. And it was a privilege to sit down with people like that. And a lot of you tuned in and connected with us through those conversations. But over time, I realized there was a bit of a gap, something that was missing in terms of alignment. We were having amazing conversations, but we weren't really speaking to a specific audience or guiding people along a clear path. And that's why we decided to wind down the Leaders Lab podcast and reflect on what we wanted to build and come back stronger. So here we are launching this brand new show, The Playbook, presented by the Leaders Lab. And this time we are crystal clear on who this is for, why we're doing this. And everything we do moving forward is going to connect back to three pillars that are at the heart of what the Leaders Lab is: hiring great people, scaling your business, and then ultimately selling your company for more money. Those are the three areas where I feel like we can provide the most value. And that's where we're going to stay focused. Now, don't worry, we're going to bring on great guests like we did before. And you're probably going to hear from some of those same names again. But instead of just broad, interesting conversations, each episode will tie back to one of these pillars with a healthy dose of leadership sprinkled in between. Because at the end of the day, great businesses are built by great leaders. Now, one thing that's a little bit different this time is I've got a co-host, Annika Kwacha, and you can see Annika here. We're going to say hi to Annika in a minute. It's going to be fun to not be doing this on my own. But please join us, whether you're trying to build the right team, grow your company, or prepare for a big exit. This is your playbook, and we're really excited to get started. Please join me in welcoming Annika Kwacha to the show as well. Hi, Annika.
Hi, Ken. Thank you so much. I'm really excited we're doing this. And I mean, I've had 3 years of learning from you within the business, and I'm so excited to be behind the mic and getting to share some of what I've learned about you with everyone else as well.
Oh, I got to tell you, not that I'm going to whine about it to the audience, but podcasting can be like a lonely business, like being on camera by yourself sometimes. So I welcome having you here and be able to pitch and catch a little bit.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Really looking forward to some of the conversations we're going to be having.
Yeah. So today we wanted to give you guys some backstory on, the new podcast, what we're focused on, my background a little bit, kind of
Mhm.
why should you listen to this and what are you going to get out of it, and to learn a little bit more, I think, about me. And then we'll start with interviews and more structured shows starting next week. But Annika, I know you've got a big list of questions for me. So you want to get started?
Yes, thank you so much. You're in the
Cool.
hot seat today, Ken. I hope
Awesome.
you're ready.
Okay. Let's do it.
Kind of starting things off from my end, I wanted to kind of take it all the way back and rewind back to the days before Fortune 500 for you, before Tony Robbins, before the Leaders Lab. And
Um,
I believe you started off in the US military. And I'm really curious, just from, the leader that I know, I'd love to know what lessons you still carry in your leadership journey now that you actually built and learned from that chapter of things.
it's kind of funny. Sometimes the lessons that you learn, you don't realize it was a lesson until later, or you don't label it until later. And I heard this thing probably, I don't know, many years after I was in the military. I heard Tony Robbins say that many great decisions, and I'm paraphrasing him here, I might be hacking it a little bit, but the key part of it is, sometimes great decisions come out of desperation, not inspiration. And this definitely applies to like my choice even to join the military. I didn't have a lot of options, or at least I wasn't exercising the options that I had. I wasn't a very focused kid. When I was in high school, we had some stuff going on in our family, and parents split up and all that kind of stuff. And I was happy go lucky, don't get me wrong, but a little too happy go lucky. I liked to go out with my friends and do stuff, and I wasn't focused in school. I wasn't focused in college. And one day I was cutting class for like the I can't even tell you how many times, Annika, that like I wasn't going to this junior college class. Like if we had like a blackout bingo card, it was probably almost all. I mean, I definitely missed more days than when I was there, and I didn't care. I mean, I just was again happy go lucky. I didn't not focus, not didn't care about success. But all of a sudden, one day, I don't know if it's divine intervention. I don't know if it's growing up. I don't know what it is, but I'm sitting in the parking lot of this Carl's Jr. like fast food restaurant, and I realized that like I'm a loser. Like I just felt it. I was like, oh my God, I'm a loser. I don't know why I didn't know it. Like all the evidence was there, Annika. Like it was pretty clear that, I wasn't doing well.
Mm.
But that day, was the day I realized that it just so happened. It's so weird how things work. I was not considering joining the military, not at all. But I was desperate, and right across the parking lot, as I'm having this moment, there's an armed forces recruiting station, and sometimes in the states they house them all together, so it'll be like the Marines guy with the Army guy with.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm going to join the Marines today. Like, I'm joining the Marines. That's what I'm going to do. And I walked in and I get in there, and the Marine guy's not there. He's out to lunch or something. And the Army guy was. And again, I don't, know what was inspiring me. I don't know if it's a higher power or what it was, but I was thinking really clearly. And I knew that if I didn't act in that moment, there was a really good chance that I wouldn't ever act. And I knew I was doing the right thing. As
Mm.
much of a punt, or as much off the cuff as it seemed, or spontaneous as it seemed, I still knew it was the right thing. And so I didn't want to lose my nerve. So I just went to the Army guy and I signed up for the Army that day. So sorry, Marines, you should have been manning your station, I guess. But getting to the lessons that I learned there, I learned a lot there. When you join the military, and you see movies about this on TV and stuff, but the whole idea is to strip someone down and take away everything that's a material possession, or even a physical thing that maybe you the way your hair is, and it's no, well, you don't have that anymore. Like, that's gone. Your clothes are gone. Your friends are gone. Your job is gone. Your identity, everything is gone, so that you have to figure out who you are and build back up. And that was a really, really interesting lesson in and of itself. And what I found in going through that is I had these leadership traits. I started being asked to lead people, and I loved it. And not for the power or anything like that. It was for the impact, I think, that you could make, and that you could take care of people, that your actions would help propel them further. And so anyway, I feel like I'm giving you a really long-winded answer, but I learned a lot there. I mean, I'd say at the end of the day, I learned discipline, I learned leadership, I learned that I was a natural leader, that it just came to me like really, really easy. I've learned from some great, great, great mentors and coaches, don't get me wrong, but there was also an amount of it that was just sort of naturally there. And so I was able to lead small teams kind of early, and I think that gave me the confidence for what came next.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really interesting, Ken. And what I find also really interesting is how those lessons never leave you. And then you go from that experience and you jump into entrepreneurship. And we'll talk about that in a second. And it's like, it's the same premise, just a different battlefield to be navigating now, if that makes sense. So,
Totally.
wow, that's really, really interesting. And like I just teased, after the military, you did step into the journey of entrepreneurship and you started your own company, and it did well and it scaled. And you've also mentioned to me throughout the years of coaching me and mentoring me as well, that those years taught you some hard lessons as well. Can
Yeah.
you share with us what that was like for you, the early leadership experience specifically?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to, and I'll come back to the early leadership. One of the things early on was, again, going back to this inspiration, desperation thing. So I'm getting out of the military. I've got a year of junior college with bad grades, and almost 4 years of enlisted military service. That combination of things is not going to get you paid. Like, you're not going to make a lot of money with that resume. And so I realized that very quickly as I was getting ready to get out of the military. And again, just sort of this trusting my gut a little bit, in that I think maybe I could do something on my own. I do think I have some leadership traits. And so my wife Shannon and I decided to start a company on our own. Again, a little bit of desperation sprinkled in with a little bit of inspiration, between those two things. Side note, about a week after we committed, more money than we had because we didn't have much money. So we had to borrow a lot of money to start this thing. About a week later, we found out that Shannon was pregnant with our first child. So, how's that for extra pressure, at 22 years old? But what I learned was I learned so many things. I mean, one of them is when you're starting a business,
Mhm.
unless you're doing it, with all the coaches in the world or life lessons in the world, but when you're 22 and you haven't gone to business school and you don't have a lot of mentors in your orbit, you're on an island. And when you make mistakes, they hurt. They hurt directly. They hurt in you're not making any money. In fact, you're losing money this week or this month. And so you learn from that. On the leadership side, I was terrible at the beginning at here was the difference. You're making me think of something right now, Annika, for the first time in a while. The difference
Yeah.
between civilian leadership and military leadership. Military leaders are willing participants. What I mean by that, not just willing, lawfully abiding participants. They've signed up for this and they have to do what you tell them.
Yeah.
Now, granted, I think they genuinely liked my leadership and stuff, but they were there, right? They raised their hand. They were supposed to be there. And I think if they're grading on a curve, they were like, Ken did a good job, but maybe even a great job. But boy, in the civilian world, it's just different. People don't have to do what you say if they don't feel like doing it. And I always thought that it was my job, because in the military, it is your job as a leader to make
Mhm.
everyone successful. You've heard things like we're only as strong as our weakest link, right? And that's absolutely true on like a battlefield situation. But in business, you got to hire the right people. You got to get the right people on the bus. You've got to then develop those people. And when they're struggling, it's not it's not being mean to tell them that they're not doing a great job. It's actually being kind and letting them know what's expected and where they stand, right? But I didn't know all that stuff yet. And so I would stay with people for a long time. And even if I created the right environment, even if I gave them the right training. And so I learned, I mean, I'm happy to dive into it anymore, but I would say the biggest lessons I learned were by the end of it, by the time we were selling to Fortune 500, I had learned some lessons the hard way in retaining people too long, assuming I was some kind of hero that could save everybody. And
Mhm.
as leaders, we just can't do that. All we can do is create a climate to let those who are motivated to succeed can succeed in our environment. Do you know what I mean? But I can't, it's the old, what is it? You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. I can't make the unmotivated motivated. In fact, I can't stand it when people say so and so is a really good motivator. And I'm like, no one motivates anyone. Motivation is internal. You can help create an environment that allows someone to then reach their full potential, but they're the ones reaching their full potential, right? It's not you motivating them. So anyway, I'll pause there.
No, I was actually loving the tangent, Ken. I was loving the tangent, and I'm gonna kind of bring you back to what you were on the topic of, because after building that business at that young age, boom, you sell the business. And I imagine that was incredibly exciting and disorienting all at the same time. You'd never done this before, just like when you started the business, you'd never done that before. I'd love to hear from you what that experience was like, how it sort of came about, and what were some of the things that stood out to you that obviously scaling and helping, businesses and founders exit is something you do now. What were some of the things you got from that experience that you're able to, be an expert on it now?
It was pretty wild experience. I would say after about 8 years in business, and we had figured some things out. We had a nice little business. We're making good money. I was getting good at delegation, getting better at hiring people, and being clear on like expectations and KPIs and dashboards and systems. And sort of out of nowhere, this large Fortune 500 company called Cintas, they bought our supplier and several other suppliers. So we owned a first aid and safety supply company essentially that, did restocking for other businesses. And they got into that world and then started buying the providers like us. So they wanted that end-to-end relationship or with the customer, that B2B relationship with the customer. And our company was really a perfect target for them, not because it was like the hugest thing, in the Cintas world. It was a pretty small acquisition, but I was young and they needed leadership to come in and help them build this new division. So, sort of in their first year in the space, we were one of their first acquisitions. And it came out of nowhere. It was literally one of those deals. I remember there was an old senior vice president. He's retired now, but he was going to a convention that I was going to be at down in Mexico. And he had his assistant call me. You got to keep in mind, I'm coming from the world of barely graduating high school, 1 year of junior college, straight to the military, and now doing this business. I'm not the most sophisticated, business person in the world. And he's got his assistant who's got a lovely accent like yours, Annika, but she's from the UK. And I've never met her before. I've never met him before. I've never met anybody from that company before. And she calls me, and this is probably 3 months in advance of when we're supposed to be at this conference. It would be like right now we're recording this in late September. It would be like, hey, on January 17th, Dave will be at the, Kokomo restaurant in Cancun at, 14, and he'd love to meet with you. And I'm like,
Scam.
yeah, I'm like, who are you? And I don't know what I'm doing on January 17th. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know what I'm doing in a week. But anyway, so I can't believe I did this, and I don't even know why I did this. But I said, well, if Dave wants to talk, have Dave give me a call, and I like hung up, and he called back like minutes later and was great. He said, hey, sorry, I'm just in this world where I got to make a lot of calls, and she helps me do it. And I was like, I'm sorry, I don't really know why I did that. We just hadn't met before, and I thought it was kind of weird. And he kind of told me they were interested in talking to us about our company, and he'd like to meet me. And so while we were there, we went out, we had some drinks, and he literally just wrote a number down on a napkin, kind of like something straight out of the movies, and it was a big number for us at the time, and it was something we hadn't considered doing before, but it seemed foolish not to. And so there was a little bit of back and forth after the fact in terms of my employment and what that would look like. And but yeah, I ended up joining up with them. And my intention at the beginning was to just stay on for a year. I mean, at that point, I'm like, hey, I'm again not college educated. This is a college educated world. I'm an entrepreneur. I like that. And now I have deeper pockets to go start something different. But I wanted to make sure the employees, we had a handful of employees that went over with us. And Cintas was great to us, right? Like they did what they said they were going to do, and they were like really true to their word and easy to deal with. And so I wanted to make sure that the company transitioned well. So I was like, I'm hanging out for a year regardless, right? Like I'm not contractually bound to do that. I'm just gonna do that. I'm gonna make sure that everything goes the way it should. I'm gonna make sure they get more than they paid for. I'm gonna make sure everybody that worked for me, again, I can't be a hero anymore. It's not my job to make them successful, but can I make sure they have the opportunity, should they take it, to do well, right? And but the more I got into that culture, the more I liked it, and I was learning so much because again, being an entrepreneur is a pretty lonely game. You're on your own. You're not benchmarking with other people. And what I learned in being part of a big corporation was they've got incredible systems and financial backing. And Annika, I could look at 30 different operations at that time that we had. Now they have like way more than that, but we might have only had 20 at the time. But out of 20 locations, I could go, okay, who's the best at gross margins? Okay, it's this one. Okay, who's the best at, who has the lowest turnover rate? Okay, it's this one. Okay, who's who does the greatest job with growth year over year or whatever. And each of those pillars, I could just call those people now, right? In fact, I could go to their location and go, you have to show me everything that you're doing. They didn't get to hide it, right? We were all part of the same team. And so what I learned was so many things that I learned there, but one of the key things early on was every business runs on a few metrics, really. Now, those metrics might have subsets to them or whatever, right? But there's normally 5, 6, 7 things that if you get right in a business, it doesn't mean you need to be number one at all of them. It just means none of them can be terrible, right? All of them need to be top 50%. And if you can get all of them into the top 20%, that compound effect is like massive. So that's one of the biggest things that I learned while I was there.
Yeah. And you mentioned something, Ken, just in terms of the difference between, leading the team that you had within your business, transitioning into, I would say, big corporate. I think one of the things that stands out for me is also just the distance between decision makers. In your business, someone came to you, put something on your desk, and bam, decision made. And now you're going to the space where it goes through 5 levels. And I'd love to hear from you just in general. What were some of the differences and things you liked about the transition and things that you were like, you know what, I actually kind of really enjoyed having a smaller team and smaller metrics to manage?
It's kind of funny. People that want control, right? Like what you're talking about, like, I want to make the decisions.
Yeah.
Well, then you have to, it's there's good and bad with both. If you have 100% control, then you have 100% responsibility. And you go back to the entrepreneur thing, and that means sometimes no checks in the mailbox, right?
Yeah.
No checks coming in the checking account. You have to kind of look at it. What are you giving and what are you getting, right? What I did learn, and I think this is universal, is the better that you perform, the more leeway people will give you. And we may not like that. We may not like that freedom is tied to results, but it just is. And I think I understood it. It actually made sense to me because it's like if you're consistently hiring great people, as an example, let's say every time Ken hires somebody, or almost every time, they're onboarding great, they have low turnover, he's promoted a bunch of people, their location's doing well, then I probably don't need to question that person as much on their next hire. But if someone had the track record of high turnover, people kind of complaining that the environment's not that great, people not sticking around that long, not a lot of people getting promoted, then we're just going to look at that with a greater deal of scrutiny, right? So I think in the corporate world, success equals freedom. And
Mm.
I was pretty focused on having success. And the way I got success, again, was going back to my last answer, which was what are the 5, 6, or 7 KPIs that drive this business? And at every
Mm.
level of the job, I you could just figure out what are they for this job now? A lot of times it's just a multiplier. Like, if you're a general manager of a location and you go to something like a VP or director spot where you're overseeing multiple locations, now it's more about leading leaders, but towards
Mm.
similar KPIs that you already figured out, right?
Exactly, exactly. And now, Ken, one of the things that I've been wondering about when it comes to the journey that you've had was, you went from owning this business, calling the shots, to having a boss again. And for those who know Ken well, we know that he subsequently transitioned back into entrepreneurship. But I'd love to know what that experience was like. Like, I'm the one making the decisions, I call the shots, and now I have this person that I'm answering to again. What was that experience like for you?
Oh gosh. Initially not great. Initially not great. And I'm going to tell you why though. My first boss was a very well-intentioned but not great at his job guy. And
Mhm.
that and I was good at my job, and so that for me was a rub. Luckily there were enough mentors in my up chain
Mhm.
that without trashing my boss, without saying anything unprofessional, I just sort of got the vibe that they had my back. And I think if you're in an environment, because we've all at times had bosses that are difficult or that we didn't like align with or whatever. And I think when you're in that situation, what you have to look at is, okay, am I just not aligned with this individual, or am I misaligned with this individual, or am I misaligned with the company and the culture? If I'm
Mhm.
misaligned with the company and the culture, and this guy or girl is just a reflection of that, then I got to go, right?
Mhm.
If I'm aligned with the company, but I'm not aligned with this individual, then can I get aligned? Is there a way? Is there something I can do on my side? And if I can't, then is this a bump in the road? And do I need to throw the baby out with the bathwater? Does that make sense? And so
Yeah.
I had some mentors that, like I said, in my orbit that I just sort of felt like understood the situation, and that time would kind of root out any reporting issue that like if I wasn't supposed to be reporting to somebody, that time would root that out because I believed in the values of the company and of the leadership above me.
Yeah.
And that's what
Yes.
exactly what happened.
Yeah. And it's, there's something to learn from each experience. And being the decision maker that's right at the top, and also learning from, like you said, some of the things that you took from that experience for how to build out the systems, the, processes that really drive a business forward. And that was
Yeah.
something that you can't just self-learn sometimes. You do have to take on that challenge of having that boss again and having that experience. And like I mentioned, you did subsequently transition out of that world and back into entrepreneurship. I'd love to know from you, Ken, what that experience was like, what sparked that idea, what gap in the market were you seeing that, kind of informed that decision?
Yeah. I'm going to go back just for 1 second
Yeah.
so going back to like reporting to other leaders, right? So the first one was a challenge. After that, I generally had really good leaders above me and around me and stuff like that. But
Mm-hmm.
you're still reporting to somebody, right? Which means you lose arguments sometimes. You get challenged a lot. And I think it was very healthy. I think a little bit of, not even a little bit, I mean, I think some good, healthy dialogue, let's just call it that, butting heads, as long as the people respect each other. And I think that's always been my thing. I don't mind reporting to someone else. In fact, I sort of like taking that role sometimes if it's somebody I can really learn a lot from. And, I don't mind that. But there's got to be that level of respect there first, because it's really tough if you're clashing and there's not that level of respect there. You know what I mean? But yeah, I've
Mm-hmm.
lost plenty of arguments to people that I really, really respect and that I should have. Like looking back on it, going, "Oh yeah, okay, they were probably right." But going to the next transition, which was out of corporate, and so again, my initial intention was to hang out for a year. That turned into 14 years, and for a lot of the reasons that we're talking about, I felt like I was learning a lot. I felt like I was getting developed a lot. I was
Yeah.
moving up through the ranks. I went from running my little company to our operation initially of maybe 30 people to within a few years, several hundred. I think we came close to about 1,000 people under leadership, and then bouncing between divisions and learning new businesses. And all of that was like really, really, really fun. But I did about, at that time, I lived in the West Coast of the US. I did about as much as you were going to do from the West Coast with
Mm-hmm.
that company. And, I still feel like I'm a young man. So, let alone like 14 years ago, or 13 years ago, I really thought I was a young man. And I was like, I got a lot more to give. Travel was also starting to wear on me a little bit. So I had traveled extensively for about 12 of the 14 years I was there. And I started reverse engineering a business kind of in my head, which was around, what do I love about my job? And I think more people need to do this if they're starting a business, is
Yeah.
what do I love doing? And you don't get to just do what you love doing. And a lot of people say, do what you love, and then you'll never work a day in your life and all those kind of things. And I'm like, well, what you love still has to pay the bills. You know what I mean? So it was like,
Right.
what, yeah, what do I love doing and where do I provide value? And so as I left Cintas, there were two areas that we really wanted to get into. One was recruiting leaders, or actually recruiting in general. At the beginning, we were
Mhm.
more generalists, and helping companies sell. Because the other thing I didn't mention on the Cintas side is, after selling my company, I became the point man on over 75 deals with them in fire protection services, first aid and safety, document management. And so I went from being the guy that got bought by the corporation to now I'm the guy writing the number on the napkin, and handing it to people. And I loved that. I loved the whole process. I loved making owners' dreams come true, giving them great value for their companies. I loved the
Mhm.
challenge of onboarding another company into ours and helping people find those opportunities. And again, we had already been through it ourselves. And so I really felt like we could do that well. But I think I had just ran its course for me. You know what I mean? Like, it's almost like the military. Some people go, it seems like you really like the military, and, why did you leave? And I'm like, I feel like I got what I needed to get in the time that I was there.
Yeah.
And so I was starting to get that entrepreneurial itch. And again, I was looking at, okay, I love developing people and I love this act of like buying businesses. So our initial thought was to do exactly what it took us 13 years to do now, which was to hire, help companies hire the talent they need to scale and then eventually sell for more. And we've been doing the hiring part for 13 plus years now, and we have helped companies scale and we help coach companies, but we haven't been doing the sell part, mainly because the recruiting part took off so big when we started. And so we
Yeah.
built a whole business around that. And now we've more recently, this year, jumped into business brokerage as well.
Yeah. And can you mention specifically that the idea was to be focused around leadership recruitment? Why that specific niche?
I think in recruiting, you think about the billions of people in the world, and you can kind of be all things to all people. But my background is really around leading people, assessing leaders, developing leaders, and the team that we've built. We've been able to train them on what to look for and build systems around that as well. And I just, again, I go back to like, where do we really provide value? I mean, we can recruit sales reps, but so do thousands of other recruiting agencies. You know what I mean? And I don't know that we do a good job when we do it. Don't get me wrong. And for certain companies, I think it makes a lot of sense for like high level strategic reps, but sort of the run of the mill reps, that's just not something I'm like super passionate about. But we have a passion for leaders because we not only love having those conversations with them and helping them pivot in their careers, but
Mhm.
the impact they make on the people that they have, you know what I mean? So once they're in their roles, it's amazing to see. And I know you've experienced this, Annika, see someone you place, they go into like a GM training program, then they become a GM. Then you see their location winning awards, you see them growing, you see them creating jobs, and to feel like you are some kind of, that's them that created that. Again, our job as leaders is to create the environment, but you created the environment that allowed that person to do that, which I think is amazing. So
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. And I think the other thing, just to add to that, Ken, is with all the AI that exists in the recruitment and HR world now, those, sales rep, etc., there's a lot that AI can actually just bulk handle. And something like leadership recruitment does require that extra nuanced things like personality testing, etc. So definitely kind of, yeah, it informs why that specific focus when it comes to this sort of thing.
Yeah, I
Um,
think we use AI a lot, especially for research and company research and things like that. I am not shy from it, but boy, I feel like people are using it wrong at times right now, and recruiting is one of those areas where I really feel like they're using it wrong. I mean, we're taking a process that, let's forget about AI for a minute. Let's go back maybe 3 years, and let's say no one was using ChatGPT 3 years ago, right? Do we think 3 years ago? So let's go back to 2022. Do we think that if we were just to rate all the hiring managers out there, do we think hiring managers at that time needed to be more engaged, show more empathy, and have more connection in the interview process, or less? I think if I asked 100 people, they would all say that hiring managers 3 years ago needed to be more involved in the interview process. And now they have this tool called AI, which allows them to be less involved. And it's so weird. It's almost like, if you just think about it logically, and like, would you use AI to find your soulmate? I don't know. Or not just to find them, but to talk to them, to like pre-qualify them. Do you know what I
I
mean?
think people are, Ken. That's the point.
Oh, geez. Well, I think AI can be a great tool for when you're sourcing candidates, to help make it faster, to help rank those candidates.
Yeah,
We've got to get back to having relationships. I mean, I think people talking to avatars on a computer and stuff like that, again, we're taking an already impersonal process for most companies and making it even less personal. It's not good for your brands. And I don't think people should be doing it. So I think some balance, we can show people how to properly use AI in their recruiting process for sure.
yeah, while still maintaining that human side of the human
Yes.
resource,
Yeah.
etc.
At the end of the day, like, if you're the hiring manager, you give them a call still, right? And still say, like, hey, we loved you. That was a great interview. Good job. You can use AI to analyze their test scores, right? You can use AI to maybe help find some candidates that we're then going to reach out to. We can use AI for a lot of things, and we do, but we can't use it to replace connection.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
100% Ken. And Ken, one of the things that I found the most fascinating about your journey, and I've actually had the privilege of benefiting from, is the fact that at one point you worked as a trainer for Tony Robbins, one of the most recognized names in personal development, but it was also just a completely different world from everything else you've told me about in this,
Yeah.
in this session. I'd love to know a little bit more about that. What was that experience like? What sparked it? And where are you at now when it comes to that?
So early on, this goes back to the first company that we owned. And again, being there on an island and not having mentors and not having blah, 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 all the stuff I didn't have. What I did have was access to people like Tony Robbins, who was pretty young in his own right at the time. And I used to listen to his cassette tapes, and I'd pop them into my work truck and just listen to these tapes. And they were amazing. Like they really, really helped me out. I would say in my early career, this even went into my corporate career as well. I was into personal development, but I used it like, like you would take cough medicine. Like, oh, my throat's itchy, I'm going to take cough medicine. I have a sales problem, I'll listen to a sales tape or a sales guru or whatever. I have a mindset problem, I'll listen to a mindset tape, and then I'll just put it away. Like there was
Mm,
no ongoing like building of me or stacking of these programs. But Tony always had a place in my heart. I liked him. He was probably the guy I listened to the most back then. And when we started our company, I got to tell you, it was a bit of a blow. We didn't talk about that, but you go from having a pretty high title in a pretty big company, managing, hundreds of people, and now it's, Ken's recruiting company in a co-working spot with 4 or 5 people. That's a humbling experience, right? So I was going through a bit of a, I would say, identity crisis in the first couple of years, a little bit of an ego check. And I ended up going back to my old friend Tony. And this time I went to a live seminar. It was the first time I ever did. And it was amazing. And I'm not that quick of a study though. Like, I see some people go to one seminar and then they come back and it's like, boom, they take off like a rocket. I sort of
yeah.
got some motivation, you know, from the environment and then let it fizzle a little bit. And then it took me a year and a half to kind of get back. And,
Uh-huh.
it just took me a while to get all of this going. But at some point, after kind of being 1 foot in, 1 foot out of that world for about 3 years, I just made a commitment. I was like, I want to be in this environment. I want to learn everything in this environment that I can. I want to go to every seminar. And so I did. And along the way, they asked me if I'd like to be part of the leadership team, to which I said yes, because if I was on the leadership team, I don't have to spend thousands of dollars for these seminars anymore, which is great. And I can come as often as I want to. And so I did that and then kind of moved up in the leadership track. I would say since COVID, I just haven't really been all that active. It has nothing to do with Tony, still one of the biggest mentors of my life. I think COVID, so so amazing how this guy can pivot. I remember it being March of 2020, and like everybody else does, everybody kind of remembers where they're at, when you really realize that things were happening. And for me, the thing that made me realize it is I was packing a bag on or around like March 15th, March 14th to go work at a Robbins seminar as a trainer. And Tony Robbins canceled the seminar. I'm like, that he doesn't cancel anything. He doesn't get sick. He doesn't, you know what I mean? Like he doesn't, or he gets sick, but he'd still just like work right through it. You know what I mean? So I'm like, oh my God, if Tony, there's a lot of companies I think that just cancel stuff because the wind blows a little too hard and they're like, we didn't really want to do this anyway. So let's just cancel.
Yeah.
That's not Tony Robbins. And it doesn't matter if it's sold out, not sold out. He'll go there and talk to 50 people or 50,000 people. It doesn't matter, right? He's on. So when he canceled, I was like, this thing is serious. And I'm like, oh my God, what's going to happen to his business, right? Because it's all like live event. I mean, obviously all of his products, but big part of the business is live events. But they were the first sort of large organization that I ever saw pivot and turn their model within months
Mm,
to just a massive online seminar kind of education base, which is amazing for them. And it's really pretty amazing for the world because more people can go through that training at more affordable prices and stuff like that. But for me, being a trainer, it was the in-person connection that I loved. And that
yeah.
was sort of gone. And after doing a few like week-long seminars on Zoom, literally week long, like 14 hours a day on Zoom, I was like, yeah, I'm probably just gonna take a pass. So I'm still a trainer. I just haven't been very active lately, but still love the community and everything that they do.
Yeah, that's really, really awesome, Ken. And it just shows the power of like the adaptability as well, like how quickly that shifted. And I'm sure for you, that was also for the business that you had at the time. It was like, okay, what does that mean for me? What can I learn from this? And even in that experience, you were still, learning and growing
That's a
from
good, no, that's a really good point that you're bringing up. I hadn't even thought about it that way, but I do think it was months after I saw Tony do that, we created the Leaders Lab, literally like months after that. And yeah, I think it was in there as inspiration of like, these are your circumstances, which sometimes seem bad. I'm sure Tony didn't look at COVID and go, wow,
yeah.
thank you, God, for bringing COVID along for my business. But in addition to all the, the real tragic stuff that happened with it, but for his business, I'm sure he didn't wish that. And yet, you know, I mean, sometimes you get served lemons and you make lemonade, right? Like, I mean, you just look at what he did with that. But I think you have to be in the mindset
Mhm.
of looking for what is the good in this? What can I take out of this? What's a different approach with this? And yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I learned from that example, and that helped us get the Leaders Lab off to a good start a few months later.
Yeah. And, Ken, speaking of the Leaders Lab, you've mentioned it in, this conversation as well. But in relation to the Leaders Lab, you often talk about these three pillars: hire, scale, sell. I love how simple it is, but also how much is actually packed in there.
Yeah,
Why specifically those three pillars?
I think each one of them could have like all these subsets, right? So, but I just look at it as a business owner and like, you're not going to do anything until you learn how to hire correctly and until you bring the right people in, right? And that's one of the things that we help people do. And we usually do it again at the leadership level, sometimes high level individual contributor or specialty spots, but really our passion and our database is leaders. We have over 150,000 leaders, as you know, Annika, in our database. The leaders help you scale and we can help you with that as well, right? So scaling becomes a function of systems and people. So if I look at a founder going, okay, I've gone from nothing to like a $5 million run rate without any key hires. They may have hired some frontline folks, but they haven't brought in a chief revenue officer or marketing officer, chief operating officer, any of that. That we can come in and help them do that and then scale the team up and the systems beyond
Mhm.
that. And then selling, I mean, knowing what we know from doing all these acquisitions and having been through it ourselves, there are some little things that businesses can do that make such a big impact. And we'll talk about that in future episodes. But a lot of people listening to this going, well, I don't have a business or I'm not going to sell my business anytime soon. Running your business or even your department of a company, so any leader listening, as
Mhm.
if investors were going to look at it and assess the value of it, right? At any point in time. That's all evaluation is. It's a snapshot of a company's health and what it's worth. If you run your business or your team like that, God, you're going to just be miles ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that, Ken. And so here we are.
Yeah.
You've stepped into entrepreneurship. You have years of placing over 1,000 executives, 75 plus acquisitions that you've been a part of. You've led, you've scaled, you've exited, you've sold. Why the playbook now?
I, hey, you actually know the answer to that, but I know you just want me to say it publicly. I think,
Please do.
no, I just think we were looking at, I'll just tell you guys what happened. Annika and I were creating, you guys may follow us on social media and you see the stuff that we're posting and stuff already. And it was like, why don't we just turn this into a podcast around our three pillars, right? We enjoyed doing the podcast before. Why not just create a podcast where every week or two, whether it's just Annika and I, or whether it's us with again one of those named guests, we sit down and talk about things because everything in a business will fall into one of these three pillars pretty much, right? You got to hire, you got to scale because under hiring, it's going to be about retaining and developing talent, right? Promoting people, org charts, stuff like that around scaling. We can talk about finances, we can talk about systems, but we're doing all of that already. So we're like, why don't we just have a once a week talk about it and save ourselves a little bit of time with all of our social media posts. So that's it. It feels very unified with our brand. I promise I won't talk quite as much every single week as I did this week, but we kind of felt like, especially for new listeners, that giving you guys the foundation of kind of who we are, who I am, and what the podcast is going to be about would be a good idea. So I appreciate you doing it, Annika.
Yeah, I'm really happy to be on the other side of this microphone. And I know we've got some really, incredible topics, guests lined up, founders that have scaled and sold, thought leaders in hiring, finance, leadership. So I think I'm so excited that I'm sure the excitement is just like going through the screen and through, the speakers to anyone listening right now as well.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. I can't wait. And guys, tune in. We'll have another episode out next week. I'm going to say every week, but hey, there might be one or two that we skip. I'm not going to feel like there's a gun to my head if we're on vacation, but should be weekly. And we appreciate you guys tuning in.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ken.
Thanks, Annika. We'll see you guys next week in the Playbook. Take care.